Now let's move to the topic which I identified already, and which is evaluating how charter schools identify and support at-risk students. And we have two presenters who will be followed by having agency representatives available from Charter School Commission and one from Rainier Prep to answer questions. So if you could introduce yourselves, and we'll bring up the presentation, follow along.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Brenton Clark, and I'm a Senior Performance Auditor with the Office of the Washington State Auditor. And with me is my colleague, Bryson Bristol, who's a Performance Auditor on our team. And we are here to present the results of our audit on evaluating how charter schools identify and support at-risk students. Before we begin, I would like to extend thanks to the 4 charter schools who were part of our audit. Their time and their cooperation was really essential for our work, and we really appreciate that. And I'd also like to thank the Washington State Charter School Commission and the Spokane Public Schools, who are Washington's 2 charter authorizing agencies, for their input and their assistance throughout the audit as well. As you may know, charter schools are tuition-free, publicly funded schools authorized in state law in 2016. Charter schools are allowed some additional flexibility beyond what traditional public schools are, such as in areas around curriculum and school district policies. In return, they do face some additional oversight and certain funding restrictions. State law also encourages charter schools to serve students who have academic or economic disadvantages. And for this audit, we focused on 3 student groups within that broader definition of academic and economic disadvantages. We focused on English language learners, homeless students, and special education students. For the audit, we selected 4 of Washington's charter schools. During the 2024-25 school year, there were 17 charter schools operating. We selected their schools looking at their geographic diversity, their at-risk student populations, and also to get representation from both of the charter authorizing agencies. And as you can see on this slide, those charter schools were Catalyst Public Schools in Bremerton, Innovation High School in Spokane, Pinnacles Prep in Wenatchee, and Rainier Prep in Seattle. In general, the results of our audit reflected positively on the schools that we evaluated. The potential improvements that we did identify mostly relate to better documenting school processes to provide more consistency for staff. We did find that the schools met nearly all of the legal requirements we reviewed. There was just one requirement where 2 schools partially met it, and we'll address that a little bit further in the presentation. We also found that the schools had adopted and were using many different leading practices. Some of those include focused small group instruction, promoting culturally relevant learning environments, and effective family engagement. We'll provide a few illustrative examples of those from the schools later in the presentation. The reasons that we did this audit, our office published a report in 2018 that focused on evaluating the initial years of the state's charter school system. At the time, the State Auditor McCarthy noted that the newness of charter schools meant that future work in the area would be appropriate for our office. During our scoping for this audit, we also heard concerns from stakeholders about how effectively charter schools are serving these at-risk student populations. And to that end, we developed the audit to answer the following questions. First, to what extent do the selected charter schools meet requirements and use leading practices to identify and support at-risk students? And second, have the selected charter schools used promising practices to identify and serve at-risk students that other schools could adopt? Bryson will go through the results for both of these audit objectives, starting with requirements.
All right. Excuse me. Thank you, Brenton. As Brenton mentioned, I'm Bryson Bristol, a performance auditor on the team. In the next 3 slides, I'll be going over the legal requirements that we looked at, and then I'll follow that up with slides on leading practices that we reviewed. The first table lists the requirements related to English language learners. These requirements are important because they help identify and serve families who may need additional English language support. As you can see in the table, the schools met most of these requirements. And as earlier mentioned by Brenton, the areas listed as could improve indicate that the school met the requirement, but there could be better documentation of those procedures related to the requirement. For the last requirement, a recently passed law required some schools to establish a language access liaison and develop a language access plan. Both schools that this requirement applied to met some of the law's requirements, including designating a language access liaison. However, one school did not have a formal language access plan, and the other school had a formal language access plan with a well-documented, language access plan, but that plan did not address some of the requirements. The requirements that we selected to review related to homeless students are listed on this table. These requirements help ensure that homeless students have equal access to education. For example, regardless of changes in a homeless student's living situation, that student is afforded the option to remain in their original school. As you can see in the table under each school, all of the schools met the requirements to identify and serve homeless students. Once again, any areas noted for improvement are related to strengthening the school's procedures in place to meet these requirements. Stepping aside from requirements for a moment, we observed promising practices related to homeless students that other schools could adopt. At Innovation High School, homeless students' families are provided a robust resource list that not only categorizes local support organizations by service type, but also includes hours of operation and other information. The special education requirements listed in this table are related primarily to various aspects of the Individualized Education Plan, or IEP, process. These requirements are designed to provide families the opportunity to be involved in the student's IEP process. This includes notifications to parents or families prior to a special education evaluation taking place, ensuring regular meetings are held as required, and further that all students' goals and progress are appropriately monitored and communicated. As the table shows, all schools met requirements. One way that schools ensured compliance was by using their internal computer systems. For example, we observed that schools had controls in place and used these computer systems to ensure that the required steps were completed. As before, any areas noted as could improve indicate that the requirement was met, but better documented procedures would help improve the school's process. I will now go over leading practices and discuss a few of the selected ones in more detail. We evaluated charter schools against 7 leading practices for identifying and serving at-risk students. The practices are recommended by a range of education and government organizations, such as the U.S. Department of Education, the Center for Learning Disabilities, and the Center for Multi-Tiered System of Supports. All schools can benefit from, and many do use these practices, not just charter schools. The practices include classroom and schedule organization, communication and information sharing, and activities to actively identify and support at-risk students. As you can see, the schools we reviewed adopted most of these practices. We would like to go through 3 of the practices in more detail. Practice 1, small groups, because it's a straightforward example to describe. Practice 3, culturally responsive environments, because this provides a telling illustration of the unique learning environments at each of the schools. And practice 7, multi-tiered systems of support, because it illustrates a complex process that includes continuous monitoring and improvement, and further illustrates where the schools were at implementation during the audit. The practice of small group instruction helps teachers differentiate their lessons plans to to better meet students' individual needs and goals. These practices support all students, especially at-risk students, needing targeted help on individual goals. For example, at Pinnacle's Prep, they use peak time, a study hall-style period during the school day, staffed with teachers available to help students at various levels of support. On site, during the period, auditors observed some students receiving focused reading help, others that were collaborating in small groups, and yet more that were working independently with assistance from teachers as needed. The next practice I want to highlight is creating a culturally responsive environment, which responds to, incorporates, and celebrates students' cultures, and engages families as equal partners. Culturally responsive instruction can increase student engagement and improve learning and behavior outcomes. We saw various culturally responsive practices at all of the schools that we visited. For example, Rainier Prep has a practice of celebrating a different culture each month. The students and their families are involved in planning and carrying out these celebrations. I'll give a brief overview of our final practice and get into the specifics of what we reviewed. Multi-tiered System of Supports, or MTSS, seeks to help schools implement a school-wide system to identify and serve students at the right level and at the right time. MTSS includes different intervention levels, from interventions that can apply to all students, to individualized short-term interventions, and up to more intensive interventions such as special education. Several of our leading practices are also part of the overall MTSS process, such as using data indicators and teacher collaboration. Our audit focused on two important elements of MTSS. First, using centralized student data to inform intervention decisions with input from multiple professionals, as well as the student's family. And second, creating and utilizing a system of continuous improvement for schools to evaluate the function of their MTSS process and make improvements when needed. All of the schools that we reviewed had been assessed as partially meeting this requirement. However, MTSS was implemented to varying degrees at each of the schools. So, for example, Catalyst was conducting a pilot on their MTSS program during the audit. On the other hand, Pinnacle's Prep had an MTSS program with a well-documented system of continuous improvement, but could not demonstrate that they had used that continuous improvement process during the audit period. And finally, we heard perspectives from families from 3 of the audited schools. They provided their experiences describing how schools had used some of these practices. These experiences were generally very positive. For example, one parent expressed appreciation for including supports to all students, such as areas for body movement breaks, because it helped destigmatize kids with autism or ADHD who may also need these supports. Parents at one school also highlighted a promising practice for connecting students to supports. The school had posted a QR code that the kids could scan to request help. The only significant concern that families raised were related to resource constraints that their schools faced. We made recommendations to all 4 of the audited schools. These recommendations focused on developing more specific documented procedures and guidance to help ensure staff can consistently carry out the activities that support legal requirements and the leading practices that we reviewed. That concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Representative Barnard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that presentation. That was very, very well done. My question is this. Clearly, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that there's a school here that's lagging more than the others, and I'm just wondering, as far as the recommendations are concerned, is there anything specific that can be done as far as sharing best practices, maybe some really focused help, and did that issue present itself when you were doing the report on what might be the problem there?
Just to clarify, you mean of the 4 schools that we looked at? I know that in our discussions with the different schools, we talked about where they were at in terms of some of the some of their guidance, and making improvements around some of their ensuring that they have consistent procedures for staff to follow. I know that, for example, for Innovation High School, they one of the areas that we looked at for special education, that was something that they were in the process of updating because their most recent special education director had recently left. And so there was some loss of institutional knowledge and the turnover around that. So I don't know that I would say that we identified like systematic concerns related to those areas that we could have made more targeted recommendations to on those areas.
Can you discuss, starting from scratch here a bit, how and why you chose 4 charter schools and why these 4? What was your criteria and thought process for choosing just 4 of them?
Sure thing, Mr. Chair. We started out by just looking across all of the charter schools in the state and looking at their student populations in terms of the targeted student populations that we were looking at. So English language learners, homeless students, and special education students. So we started with that as our primary focus. We then were looking at what schools seem to have higher rates or higher populations of those different areas. Then looking at some of the geographic, trying to get some schools representing different areas of the state. That was a little bit challenging is because so many of the charter schools in Washington are concentrated in the Puget Sound region, but we did want to try to get some amount of variation and just to get a little bit more of telling a broader picture about what's going on in the state, even if we could not really get a truly representative sample. And then we also wanted to make sure that we had at least one school who was authorized by Spokane Public Schools. Most of the schools in the state are authorized by the Charter School Commission. So we did select one of those 4 from that were authorized by Spokane Public Schools because we wanted to see if there were any major differences in terms of how things were going for schools that were authorized by the Charter School Commission versus authorized by a school district. And then as far as this, why specifically 4, that was what seemed like it would be able to be a manageable amount of work in the time that we want, and within the time window that we wanted to do the audit.
Thank you. In the presentation and the report, you compare the populations, the at-risk subpopulations, to statewide and statewide to statewide charters. There's been some documentation, other audits that have looked and seen that there are in the areas that charter schools say they are drawing from for a special population for their students may have much higher than average populations. And were these schools actually, rather than looking and saying, well, there's a 1%, it's really a 25% difference in enrollment, say for, I think that's homeless students. But if the homeless population, not looking statewide, but in their student pool area is 7%, do you have that, and did you look at that?
That's a very good question, Mr. Chair. I know that we started based on some of the analysis that has been done by the State Board of Education. I know that they do regular reports, that have been doing regular reports that look at not just general things about student populations at charter schools, but also looking at actual student outcomes. But that one of the things that they was comparing charter schools, populations in charter schools to the populations of their home district. And I know that there's debate about what the best comparison point is, but that's been used in a lot of researches. And to the best of my recollection, we were looking at, not just comparing the individual charter schools that we're looking at in terms of their student populations to statewide, but we were looking at compared to their home district that they were most closely to, and did it look like there were significant differences. So that did play was a factor in our consideration of which schools to select.
Thanks. And if I can ask myself for permission to change subjects and on multi-tiered systems of support, which I've been deeply involved with, we have very strong state requirements leading the nation at one point in time on MTSS use for kindergarten through second graders. Your universe of 4 schools doesn't include were there any elementary schools that
of those 4, Catalyst Public Schools did. I think they go all the way down to kindergarten. But yes.
So I couldn't really tell from the report if it examined at all or just used other criteria for the proper implementation under state law of MTSS to determine, for example, if students have indicators of disabilities in terms of why they're not reading and applying and additional supports up until the point where you should be evaluating them for disabilities. Is that part of the criteria that you looked at, or is it outside the report?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, like you said, that the requirements are specific for grades K through 2,
Yeah.
because that only would have applied to one of the 4 schools that we looked at. We didn't end up evaluating that as part of this audit.
I appreciate that. I was just trying to wonder, because looking at when I see MTSS, I think of that as a very specific element. Thank you for the report and for sharing. At this point in time, we have, if the Charter School Commission, if Marcus Hardin is here, and do we have Karen Lobos from Rainier Prep available virtually? I'd like to, do you like to respond, or do you have any prepared presentation or anything? And what would you like?
I do not have a presentation, but I will gladly respond to a couple questions. First of all, thank you for having us here. Super excited, I guess, for the record. Marcus Hardin, the Executive Director of the Washington State Charter School Commission. I always like to start with just, I'm a practitioner first. So year 24 in education, 15 years in traditional school, 5 now in the charter sector, one way or the other, and 4 as a founding school founder, and so I always like to say I'm motto agnostic, definitely big on how can we enrich the public school system and free and open to all. I'll answer a couple of questions first because I was just back there listening. Kudos on the MTSS, agreed, as a former language arts teacher and a principal at an alternative school. Understand that greatly. While elementary was not my thing, understand it. And I know I can speak broadly for anything related to innovation, as to the previous comment there, and I can speak a little bit better to the schools we authorize. And so, yes, Catalyst is our only one in that one that was K through 12. Their MTSS system is pretty broad with being a K through 12 school. As you know, most of the identifiers for reading or special education, any of those things come after. When we get to grades 3 and 4, we start to see the trends in K2, but when they start to learn how to read and go from reading to learn and learning how to read to reading to learn, becomes a shift in. They have a really unique population in that area, being K-12, and serve at a really high level. I'll back out and speak to the question about innovation. They previously, they have Spokane can speak better to their authorizing. I'll just give a little color, I suppose. They previously were an alternative school, so had a really high special education population. So I would have to imagine a lot of their special ed pieces were in place to move then. They've then moved to eliminate their middle school portion and are just a standalone high school now. So I think a lot of those practices are sitting in what does that secondary look like as a former 6th and 7th grade language arts teacher. While secondary is the same, those are very different as you're receiving those pieces. Overall, we are super excited as a commission to see the work that is going in. Again, I have strong biases, spending most of my time in Title I or in alternative school settings. A lot of my heart is with special education. I'm also a father of 2 young people who have one who has a reading superpower, as I like to say, and another that has some behavioral supports. And so close to my heart. And so one of the things, a few of the things we've done at the commission has continued to provide technical assistance. Thank you to the legislator to do that in more of a support role. It's equally as a complaint process role. And then I'll say lastly, we have not formally rolled this out, but I guess this will be a sneak preview. We are beginning to embed into our new academic performance frameworks indicators for schools to see belonging, which this audit really promoted. And we know students who feel safe and secure in their educational setting are then better to learn. I don't believe either is above the other. We want young people who are whole and feel safe in their learning environment and are also able to be productive members of society. And so really proud of the work, continue to want to grow the work. Nothing is perfect. And so continue to press schools and really thankful to Catalyst, SIA, Innovation, and Rainier Prep for their involvement in this, and the SAO for taking the time to do so.
Thank you. Any other response to? Oh, I didn't see that. We've got. I understand we've got a number of folks from schools online and available, not just one. Do any of you from the 4 schools care to respond to anything you heard or would like to share about the SAO report? Raise your hand on Zoom if you want to respond. Okay. All right. In that case, I think what we'll do is thank you for being here in person. That's very helpful. In that case, if no one is responding, then we'll move to public testimony. And we have 2 people signed up for public testimony. Can you bring them up? They're online, aren't they? Oh, one of them's here. Okay. Thank you. Please introduce yourself. We're not going to use a timer, and we've got.
It's the best experience I've had testifying in committee before. Thank you, Chair Paulette and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Barbara Gilchrist, and I am the Director of Government Relations for the Washington State Charter Schools Association. I'm here today in support of the recent SAO report on how charter public schools identify and support at-risk students. We really appreciate the auditor's examination of 4 of our state's charter public schools and their insights into how these schools serve homeless students, special education students, and multilingual learners. This report shed light on some of the ways charter public schools are living into the intent of the charter school law and gave us insights into how to improve our processes for serving at-risk students. Innovation High School, Catalyst Public Schools, Rainier Prep, and Pinnacles Prep are making important strides in closing the opportunity gap for at-risk students with strong accountability, more flexibility, and less funding than traditional public schools. They exemplify how partnering with parents, intentional classroom flexibility, and using leading practices supports students and their parents to feel and see a difference in their education. And we see this making a difference across Washington's charter public schools. On last year's SBAC, we saw multilingual learners outperform their statewide peers by 20% in ELA and 13% in math. We also saw special education students outperform their statewide peers by 3% in English language arts and math. And according to a 2025 WASAC analysis, charter schools appear to provide strong benefits for historically underserved groups, and Black and Latinx students, students eligible for free and reduced price lunch, and students with disabilities all showed larger improvements than their peers. We hope this report leads to greater partnership and collaboration between charter public schools, traditional public schools, and state education agencies. We look forward to finding and implementing meaningful ways for us to share best practices, and will continue supporting policies that support all public schools and identifying and supporting at-risk students throughout their K-12 education. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for being here in person. I suppose since you're with the Charter School Association, let me ask, is there any collaborative effort going on to take the recommendations given for the 4 schools to have them implemented and reviewed by all the charter schools in the?
Absolutely, and I believe Excellent Schools Washington, who's also here today to testify, can speak more to that. A lot of those best practices works really lives with them as an organization in supporting schools, but at the association, we also work with our schools to support it and highlight the work that schools that are serving students really, really well are doing and how other folks can implement that in their schools, and then also to collaborate across those boundaries.
Thank you. All right, let's go to our second testifier, who is Julie Kennedy.
All right. Thank you, Chair Paulette and the members of the committee. It's an honor to be here online, and apologies that I'm not there in person, but thank you for tolerating the Zoom. I'm Julie Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director at Excellent Schools Washington. We're a local nonprofit focused on ensuring all Washington kids have access to an excellent education. I'm here to support the recent SAO report on how charter public schools identify and support at-risk students. Through my work at Excellent Schools Washington, I've spent a significant amount of time in the schools studied in this report and with the leaders, and was proud to see some of the practices that I've observed in action were captured in the report. 2 of the practices that stand out to me that I've seen firsthand. The first is using data to design early intervention and small group instruction, and looking at data frequently to know when and what support students need, and then making sure that students are back in class learning with their peers as quickly as possible. The second powerful practice I've seen firsthand is the school leaders' commitment to keeping families engaged and in the loop. These school leaders aren't waiting until the end of the year or for test scores to come home via the mail to have the conversations, but are starting the collaboration early on. We all know that parents want to support their students and want what's best for them, and these school leaders are creating tangible school partnerships with parents in service of student success. What's captured in this report isn't rocket science, it's hard work, and it's so exciting to see this hard work paying off. It's exciting to see these schools delivering on their promises to families. We heard some of the data shared from our previous speaker, so it's also exciting to see that this is working in real, tangible ways. At Excellent Schools Washington, we're excited to leverage this report and to continue finding opportunities for collaboration among all of the charter schools, and to build bridges and ensure that all students in the state are given the chance to thrive. I'm happy to answer questions as well.
Well, at the risk of giving you advertising time, but I have no idea what Excellent Schools Washington is. Are you a nonprofit, or are you a consulting firm? What are you?
Yeah, we're a nonprofit. So we launched in July of 2024. So we're a new nonprofit. And our work, is to really do what is captured in this audit, which is to identify the practices that are working and support the sharing of those practices to really level up educational opportunities across the state.
And do you work solely with charter schools?
We work with charter and traditional district. We work with anyone who's serving students in the state.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks for testifying today. All right. That closes our hearing for today. And I want to thank the state auditor's staff for both presentations, and in particular, again, just want to reiterate for those people who will be watching this on TVW that the State Auditor's Office is open for suggestions on audits, and is very receptive to scoping input on those audits, and people should take heed of that offer if you have an interest. And with that, our meeting is concluded. Thank you, everyone.